how many kinds of astral energy exist? Well, when you ask a question like this, first you have to define what you're working with. So, astral energy, depending upon your cultural context, can be things like chi or prana or pneuma or any number of other terms for what people call subtle energy. These subtle energies, in fact, are best represented by sensation itself, specifically the intensity or flavor or kind of sensation that's being picked up either by your sense of touch, your vision, your hearing, or your sense of taste. Esoterically speaking, these are referred to as clairsentience, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairgustance, or subtle sense of taste. Okay, with that brief definition kind of out of the way with, how many kinds of astral energy are there? Well, it depends upon who you ask. According to one of my teachers, Mark Rasmus, there are between 300 and 400 distinct forms of astral energy. I can tell you using the 60 skill system where we work with the human body, that's one, the letters of the Kabbalah, there are 27 of those, the 12 planets, the 12 zodiac, and of course the 12 Sephiroth, you end up with a little over 60 if you approach it through that lens. But also keep in mind that when you're defining these things as, say, fire, air, water, earth, or akasha, there are other variants of that energy that can be fairly distinct, just a little bit to one side of how it's defined and a little bit to the other. So again, the idea that there might be 300 or 400 different kinds of astral energy isn't really much of a surprise. Well, let's talk about the major variants of this. Okay, you've got the human body. It generates a kind of astral energy by itself. For the most part, this seems to be generated by breath. Okay, that's fairly easy to understand. Now, you also have the esoteric elements, or essentially the building blocks of the phenomenal world. These are roughly put into the categories of fire, air, water, and earth. Some systems have akasha, or the terrestrial representation of the power of the void or nothingness. Okay, that's 5 by themselves, but even within a system like Franz Barton's Kabbalah, they have 27 distinct flavors of that. Fair enough. Next, you have the kind of astral energy developed by the planets. Now, the strongest of this on a day-to-day basis for human beings is generated by the moon and tends to have a kind of watery or magnetic quality to it. That said, all of the other planets have this as well. But 60 skills, you mentioned 12 planets. There aren't 12 planets. Well, sort of. Getting past the discussion of whether or not you consider something like Pluto to be a planet, fair enough, you've also got the astral energy created by the planet Earth, which isn't quite the same as Earth energy, and I know that's a little confusing. It has more to do with your vital force or elan or metabolism, if you will. Okay, you have the outer planets of Uranus and Neptune. You also have this thing called the extrasolar region, which is the space between the stars. That, interestingly enough, generates a kind of astral energy all its own, which again is curious because in most ways of looking at astral energy, you need a physical breathing body to generate this force. Yet the planets seem to do this just fine on their own. Of course, you also have the 12 symbols of the zodiac, or those constellations, and while they mostly generate mental level energy, they do have a bit of an astral flavor as well. Now, whether this is because they're generating that force directly themselves, or through the process of reflection off of a practitioner, an astral force is generated, well, that's a bit of a question. And that same question can be applied to things like the planets. But functionally, yes, they have an astral nature as well. Okay. Now you also have the issue of the Sephiroth, okay, or the tree of life. These all have different flavors associated with them as well. Again, whether they generate this astral force themselves or it's a reflection off of you, hard to say, but functionally it's there too. Okay, so those are 60 or so basic ways of looking at this. What are some other ways of looking at this? Well, everything that's alive around you generates astral energy of a kind, including some things that you wouldn't think do, such as crystals. Again, we can get into a big discussion about that, but suffice to say, they seem to. Well, this astral energy being generated by, your pet dog or an elephant out on the range somewhere in a game park or in Africa, it has a distinct flavor to its astral energy. And what's more interesting is if you really work with this stuff a lot and you really fine tune your skills in being able to identify this stuff, you'll notice differences between individuals as well. This is also true of human beings, and one of the reasons why magicians or practitioners of the yogic and meditative arts are frequently so confusing to other people. That vibe your Uncle Bob gives off has been the same pretty much his whole life since he was a kid. That way, when he walks in the room, you know who he is on a subtle or subconscious level. When you practice the meditative and yogic arts, that vibration can distinctly change depending upon what you're working on. Now, what's very interesting about this is people who aren't even into these practices or aren't even particularly energetically sensitive in general pick up on this in a big way subconsciously. That's the reason why a lot of meditative practitioners can be so disturbing, because they see you walk into the room, but that subconscious vibe you're giving off changes depending upon what you're doing with your practice. People in general don't like this. They'll get over it if they actually like you, but it can make your working life a little difficult depending upon what's going on. Now, what are some examples of this in the terrestrial world? Actors and performers. Brad Pitt's walking around downtown LA acting like Brad Pitt, but he gets on stage, boom, he hits it, and all of a sudden he's the star. Also, actors spend a lot of time learning how to change this astral nature in their vibration to fit a given role. Just as a performer can look like a normal guy, normal musician walking down the street, but the second he gets on stage, plugs the amp into his guitar, boom, he's a different guy. So those are examples of practical applications of how this works and why this isn't really as strange a concept as some people make it out to be. Now, a large part of magical, yogic, and meditative practice centers around identifying these different astral energies, learning how to mimic them, making it stronger, and then utilizing them to do things. So, everybody out there has met or heard about the hands-on healer. Fine. Everybody out there has met the martial artist who can touch a man with his finger and he goes flying across the room. They cultivate these specific kinds of energies to do things. So, what are some things you can do with these? Well, first off, the easiest thing to do is to increase athletic performance. Energy is represented by things like the letter Z in Barden's Kabbalah, can be used to greatly enhance your physical endurance for things like running. Great. Other letters, like the letter D, can greatly increase striking power or make you stronger than you normally would be, probably through some variation of neuromuscular recruitment and helping back-end functioning in the metabolism or endocrine system. But functionally, if you work with the letter D a lot, you can get much stronger. And I did have a conversation with a man once who transformed himself from a bench warmer to a Division I champ in wrestling by working with the letter D. So that's a practical application of this kind of thing by enhancing that sensory apparatus. Now, the trick with astral energy is it's not permanent. So a lot like exercise, you have to keep working with it to maintain the effect. Sometimes if you work with too much of a given energy, you need to counterbalance it with another energy. So if you're working with a water type energy to be more sensitive to your patients or in a sales environment, when you get home, you're probably going to want to work with some fire energy so you don't wind up sitting on the couch all night long, eating Cheetos and wondering why you're not getting anything done. So this is a brief introduction to the several hundred different kinds of subtle energies that exist out there and give you an idea of some things you can do with it. If you would like to learn more about this and you like the topic of today's discussion, please hit the like button down below and consider subscribing to the channel. You can go to 60skills.com to learn all about this kind of thing and how to leverage it to make your life better. Otherwise, as per usual, train hard and be well.